Let's bring in Tom Pelissero. He's covering the Senior Bowl. NFL Network provides live coverage of that. It's Saturday at 2:30 Eastern. This Kenny Pickett hand size, Tom, I mean, it's worth bringing you on just to talk about it. I mean, how controversial is this at the Senior Bowl?
Dan, I think we've got one hand-sized story every year with the quarterbacks in the NFL draft. You remember a couple of years ago, Joe Burrow at the Combine after his measurement tweeted something along the lines of, "I've decided to retire from football because the ball's going to slip out of my tiny baby hands." With Kenny Pickett, it's kind of a unique deal because, yes, I had heard the same thing. People were curious about his hand size, which is pretty standard, especially when a guy wears gloves on the field. That's always a tell that makes scouts think this guy might not have particularly big hands. What I didn't know until I sat down with Pickett first thing yesterday morning here in Mobile was he's got double jointed thumbs. So his thumb actually kind of, if you think about pressing your thumb into the palm of your hand, that's kind of like the resting position for him. It obviously doesn't impact him throwing the football, but if you're talking about splaying out your hand and measuring it from thumb to pinky, you might get potentially shortchanged in your measurement. So he did not get his hand measured here. But his explanation was pretty simple, which is I'm going to, do some extra exercises, basically roll the thing out, which is something that quarterbacks do. As silly as it sounds, you roll out your hand to make sure that you're getting, close to 9 inches, and he'll get an accurate measurement at the Combine in a month or so.
But is this a big deal for some teams?
Well, it's a consideration, I think especially for the cold weather teams, you always hear that in colder weather it can be harder to grip the football if you've got, smaller hands. Everybody would love to have a Brett Favre 10.25-inch meat hook, but as long as you're on the plus side of 9 inches, generally that's going to be sufficient for teams. Now, if somebody measures in well below the line, just like any other measurable, if your height, your weight, your speed, whatever is just so far below the line, that's going to raise some questions. But again, we've seen guys with not huge hands have success in the NFL. There's guys like Baker Mayfield. There's smaller quarterbacks who have huge hands. Is that saved Baker Mayfield from ever fumbling in Cleveland? No. Is it the end-all, be-all? It's one of many traits, but it's always an interesting one to hone in on it at these times of year.
All right, help me understand. You reported Harbaugh is going to go visit the Vikings tomorrow. Help me understand, you have National Signing Day, and it's like Michigan's letting him go flirt with somebody to see if he or they fall in love together. I'm trying to find the logic in this from Michigan's side of this, and maybe even Jim Harbaugh.
Well, Jim Harbaugh, if you go back a year, Dan, took a pretty substantial pay cut on his new deal. He was one of the lower paid Power 5 coaches, making in the $4 million range last season. Then he ends up making a run to the college football playoff. So there was always going to be some sort of a reckoning that happened after the season contract-wise, whether that was Michigan, boosting him up into that $10 million range that most of the top coaches are at, or Jim doing what he's done over the past several months now, which is, really since Michigan clinched its spot in the playoff and they had their, that whatever it was, several-week gap, he was in touch with NFL people. Those rumors started in December. And one of the people that Harbaugh is close to in the NFL now is Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who is the Vikings' new general manager. Harbaugh gave him his first job back in 2013 in San Francisco when Adolfo-Mensah was a commodities trader, and they hired him as an analyst with the 49ers. They developed some type of relationship during that time. And so the expectation within the league was that if Harbaugh got a job, Adolfo-Mensah would probably come with him. Well, now you've got the flip scenario where Kwesi's in Minnesota. He's a big supporter of Jim Harbaugh. They reached out. They got permission to speak with him, gauge his interest on Saturday, and it's now pushed to the point that the plan is for Harbaugh to fly into Minnesota and interview on Wednesday. I mean, until Harbaugh actually gets to the Vikings facility, Dan, I feel like there is some level of a George Costanza driving to the Poconos thing going on here where it's like, I'm really going to do it, guys. I'm really going to go to the NFL. And you just wonder, what potentially could happen. But we're 24 hours away from that being a real thing. I mean, it's absolutely a consideration for the Vikings. They interviewed Kevin O'Connell again yesterday. He's in the mix. Patrick Graham, the Giants defensive coordinator, is in Minnesota today. Those are really your finalists at this stage, but you would think if Harbaugh sets foot on that plane, he's doing it with the intention to try to get a deal done in Minnesota.
But I'm trying to also understand the Dolphins here, because if Stephen Ross doesn't want to take Harbaugh away from his alma mater, but if he knows Harbaugh wants to go back to the NFL, he doesn't want Harbaugh to go to the Vikings. He would want him to go to the Dolphins, wouldn't he?
You would certainly think that, and Stephen Ross, you're right. I mean, this has been going on for basically since Jim Harbaugh got to the University of Michigan, which was people asking Stephen Ross if he was going to hire him, and Ross, who has his name on practically every building in Ann Arbor, repeatedly saying he wasn't going to be the one to bring him back. Absolutely, the dynamic changes when it becomes real, but I would tell you, many of us have chased this throughout the week, the possibility that that the Dolphins could get in the mix for Jim Harbaugh. To this point, personally substantiated that is a front burner thought for them right now. They've got interviews later this week with Mike McDaniel, the 49ers offensive coordinator, and Kellen Moore, the Cowboys offensive coordinator. Those two guys are squarely in the mix. And based on these next 48 to 72 hours, exactly how this plays out.
Great stuff as always, Tom. Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan.
That's Tom Pelissero, NFL Network insider, checking on hand size at the Senior Bowl.